Hey there YouTube, and welcome to Ask a Maestro. Today's question comes from Cami Lee of the Metropolitan Youth Symphony, and she asks, what is an A? Well, actually, that's really not quite what she asked. What she asked was more like, I've heard that there are ensembles and recordings that play at a lower pitch level than A440. What's the deal with that? Well, that's where we're going to go in this video, but we're going to start out with what is A440 in the first place. 440 is in reality 440 hertz. A hertz is a cycle per second. When we say 440 cycles per second, we mean that this is the number of times that a vibrating body is vibrating in the course of a second. Now this could be a string, a column of wind, a tailpipe, anything that vibrates. And if it vibrates 440 times in a second, we perceive that as a pitch that we call A. Now that is of course an arbitrary distinction. There's no particular reason that we should call 440 cycles per second an A. We could call it a G or an X or Yolanda. And really there's no reason when I play this note it should sound this way. Why not when I hit this button, it sounds like this? As you may have guessed, we didn't always define A as 440 cycles per second. There has actually been a pitch inflation over the past 300 or 400 years. So in fact, the A that Mozart heard was probably closer to an A flat. Actually, we have pretty good evidence that Mozart tuned his own pianos to A equals 420. Okay, let's listen to a few different recordings of the same piece, and you'll hear what I'm talking about. We're going to listen to a little of the Bach Bedinnery in B minor, played at a 440 pitch level, and then we'll hear it at a historically informed lower pitch. So how did we figure out that in the 18th and 19th centuries, the pitch level was so much lower than it is today? They did not have electronic measuring systems. They didn't have an electric tuner like I have right here. So how can we know what their pitch levels were? Well, they did have technology that has lasted till this day, instruments. So we look at church bells, we look at organs, we look at brass instruments. The other thing that we look at are tuning forks, which before the invention of electronic tuners were the best way to have a pitch designation. The tuning fork was invented quite early in 1711, so during the lifetimes of Bach and Handel. And the earliest tuning fork that we have is an A that's tuned to 423.5 cycles per second. So that is quite a bit lower than our contemporary standard of 440 cycles per second. But there was never any one standard. I mean, even in the same little town, you might have the church organ tuned at A450, and you might have had somebody's harpsichord in their house tuned at A417. But as a gradual trend, pitch tended to go upward. The first attempts at reforming pitch came around in the early 19th century. In the 1860s in Paris, opera singers complained so much to the French national government that they released an edict saying that A could go no higher than 435 cycles per second. Now, this is just a great example of things were very different in the 19th century than they are today. Because can you imagine the national government of any country making a law because opera singers were complaining about it? In the 1920s, the American music industry came to a general agreement that A would be 440, and that was adopted as an international standard in the 1950s. And people were very content to use A440 as their standard all around the world. Until that is, when musicians started to look back to the practices of earlier times. And through amassing this body of evidence, they came to the conclusion that A had been a lot lower, so now groups that specialize in the performance of early music tend to play with an A that equals 415. Now, given that there was no standard pitch designation before the 19th century, how did they come upon 415 as their A? Well, it's a matter of convenience that they settled on 415, because 415 Hz is actually the frequency of an A flat on a modern piano. So if you decide that you're going to play earlier music with the A set to 415, you can have instruments that are tuned in modern pitch, like harpsichords and organs, simply play a half step lower. Is there use and worth and interest in trying to recreate the music of past centuries as closely as we possibly can? Sure. Is it worth getting our panties in a bunch about? Because a lot of early music enthusiasts will wax lyrical about how they can't listen to music from the Baroque era if it's not played at A415. But it's a fiction to say that all music was once played at one pitch level and now it's played at a different one. The history just doesn't bear that out. There were wild fluctuations up and down, and over the centuries we sort of settled on these conventions, and that's why music sounds the way it does today. Okay, YouTube, that's it for this episode of Ask a Maestro. Thank you so much, Cami Lee, for asking your great question. Everybody else, please leave your questions in the comments below. Feel free to like and subscribe. And until next time, play an instrument or sing a song. And until then, goodbye, everyone.